All right. Hello, MEGN 301. Today we're going to be talking about project planning and the methods that we'll use in this class and how we'll organize this class to help you guys get your project done on time. So this is something we don't oftentimes talk a lot about in engineering, but it's really important when we have bigger projects that have a lot of parts that need to come together at the end to make a cohesive finished product. We need to talk about how we manage that project, how we manage a team to the point where we can make sure that everybody gets their work done and we get a finished product delivered on time. All right, so if you've done project planning before, you've probably used a method that's kind of old school, it's been around forever, called Waterfall. All right, Waterfall follows this basic process. It looks kind of like a waterfall with boxes leading into the next box, where you do some initial research. Then we move into a design phase where we sketch up our prototype in blueprints or in CAD or something like that. We build the prototype, we do some testing. Usually we have to go back and do some additional refinement after that. And if you get stuck in any of these boxes, you'll go back up, you go back to the drawing board if you've heard that expression before, and you'll start over and you kind of work through the cycle until you get to the end when you have a finished product. So Waterfall works well for certain things. It's really good at giving a broad overview of the whole project. Helps you kind of see the whole thing in perspective of what needs to be done to get to your end product. It's good at finding dependencies. So if you, say, need a machined part and you have to go to the machine shop and make that part, you probably need a drawing of that part before you can go to the machine shop and make it. So it's good at spotting dependencies like that will help you get the order of a project correct where you can get your work done. It's good at helping to allocate resources for different aspects of the project as you kind of lay out this whole big project plan. You can see where you think most work will need to be done and what's going to require you the most time and resources to complete the project. So you can see that done ahead of time before you get into the thick of the project. And it's also good at laying out a master timeline for the project. So you can give yourself milestones and you can figure out how long it's going to take to complete the whole project. There are some disadvantages with Waterfall though. It's a linear process. So the project can get stuck at one stage. So if you have a dependency in your project and it turns out that making the drawing for your machine part was more difficult, you took more design work to get that done, then you can't send that part to the machine shop and you're stuck in this one stage until you can get it all done. If you have unforeseen complications where you find out your design's not going to work after all, it can kick the project way back to the planning and design phase, and you kind of have to start all over again. And it also tends to spread work out unevenly. So when you have a lot of time before a milestone, things tend to happen kind of slowly. It tends to be kind of quiet. And then as you come up to your milestone, you suddenly have to get everything done, and you have these really busy periods. So you have periods of time where your team, parts of your team are working on something, and other teammates are not really doing a whole lot. And then it kind of shifts around, and everybody has periods of time where they don't do much, and then when they're really completely slammed and they have a lot to do. And probably the biggest disadvantage of Waterfall is you do all your planning at the beginning of the project, right? Which sounds like a good idea in theory, but the problem is at the beginning of a project, that's when you know the least about the problem that you're trying to solve. You're going to be learning about that problem all throughout the project, and if all of your planning is done before you learn most of the critical knowledge that you need to know to complete the project, it makes it very difficult to make a realistic plan of how to get the project done. So what we'll be using in this class is known as Agile project management. And from the name, you can tell that this is a project management scheme that's designed to be more easy to adapt and to change directions quickly. So you have an Agile project management scheme. All right. Some of the advantages here is it helps you keep a more consistent workload where you have more of a slow burn of steady stuff to do rather than periods of inactivity and then overwhelming amounts of work for periods of time. It helps you prioritize your tasks in a complex project. It's good at bringing your team together to sort out what really needs to get done and what's sort of more of a nice to have, so you can prioritize getting a functioning prototype. It's good at dividing labor across a team. You break up your project into smaller bite-sized pieces, and you can assign those out to your team so that everybody has something to work. And it's really good at keeping track of what needs to be done and what is getting finished in real time, which can be useful for making sure that you're making continuous progress on your project. All right, so why do we do this? Basically, this is designed in this class to be a flexible method for organizing tasks. You can kind of adapt this method to what works for your group, and it's meant to be pretty concise with the reporting. We try and keep what you have to turn into your instructor fairly lightweight so that you aren't spending all your time documenting what you've done or showing planning. You're actually working on your project is what we primarily want you to be doing. So if this feels really burdensome, just know that that's not in the way it's intended to be. So ask for feedback, and we'll help you out and make sure that you guys work on or arrive at a method as a team that really works for you guys and is helping you to make consistent progress in the project without taking up a bunch of extra time doing documentation and planning. All right, so the way this works is we'll break up your project into what we call sprints. So a sprint is a short defined period of time where you're working to advance your whole project forward towards a sort of short-term goal. All right, so in industry, sprints can be sort of any sort of short-term length of time. A month is really common at larger companies where everybody will plan for the next month work at a time. For this class, we're going to use 2-week periods. That works out well with the structure of our semester. Is you'll work consistently for 2 weeks to try and get a specific set of deliverables done, and then you'll reevaluate your project every 2 weeks and see how things are going. All right, and the key thing here is each sprint has a really clearly defined set of goals and work assignments that you set out at the beginning of the sprint, and then at the end of each sprint, you reflect on how that went, and you talk together as a team to figure out what the goals for the next sprint should be also. All right, to implement this, there's going to be some team roles that we'll need you guys to fill. All right, so the sort of team leader role is what we call the product owner in Agile, right? So this is a team member who's responsible for interfacing with the customer, right? So they kind of manage that communication. It can be confusing if you have too many people trying to talk to the customer. It can be overwhelming for the customer, and it can lead to asking the same questions over and over again, or you overlook questions that were important to ask, but you thought, well, I thought you asked that. No, I thought you asked that, and it turns out the question never got asked of the customer. All right, so your product owner is going to manage that relationship, so they'll be primarily talking to the instructor. Obviously, we want everybody in the class to get feedback from the instructor, but for defining the project goals for your team, we want your product owner to kind of take point of making sure they know what's expected of the team during a sprint and getting feedback on the deliverables that we'll be looking for. All right, they're going to set realistic expectations both with the team and the customer to make sure that everybody's on the same page of what can be accomplished and what the goal of the project is. And they help set priorities for what we call the feature backlog, or the things that we're going to be including in this product that we're developing. All right, this should be the most organized member of your team because they kind of have to be able to corral everybody and make sure that everybody's got tasks to work on and keep the team moving forward. Now, in this class, the product owner is not just going to be a purely managing position. We need you to be able to manage the team while also contributing to the design project. It's important that you get to the opportunity to work on the prototype as well. All right, everybody else on the team is going to be a member of the development team. So the development team is responsible for the technical development of the product. So they're the people who are building the prototype, who are doing all the design work, the calculations necessary to design this prototype and make it a cohesive whole, right? So there's going to be tasks during this semester that need to be completed simultaneously. So you'll be dividing those tasks amongst the team members. And an important thing that the development team needs to do is they need to provide feedback to the product owner on how things are going, how long tasks will take, and setting priorities. So giving the technical feedback of what's important to include in the prototype, and then also how long it will take the team to complete those tasks so that we can all be on the same page when we're planning out how to complete this project. So let's take a look at how this process actually works. So this is the sprint or the SCRUM Agile project management basic skeleton of what happens during a sprint. Okay, so at the beginning here, we create what's called the product backlog, right? So these are all the features that you want to include in your project. So list out all the features you would really want to have in your project when it's done. All right. During a sprint, what happens is the team and the product owner get together and they set out a list of tasks that are going to be completed during that sprint. So you pull items out of the feature backlog of, say, we're going to work on these items out of the feature backlog, and we're going to put them into the sprint backlog, which are the items that are going to be done during this sprint. Okay? Then you go into the sprint and you start working on those tasks and you start completing those tasks. We encourage you to meet on a regular basis every class period. Just touch base with all your teammates to let everybody know what you're working on, how it's going, and if there's anything else that you need from your team to complete the tasks that you're working on. Right? So we have that constant sort of feedback where you're tagging up with your team to make sure that everybody knows what they're working on and communicates how things are going with the team so that everybody's aware of what the state of the project is. All right. Then at the end of each sprint, you'll have a specific amount of time to come together as a team to look at how the sprint went and reflect on how things are going, and then plan for your next sprint, right? So this is a period of reflection of what went well during the sprint, what didn't go so well during the sprint that we could change for the next one, and what's the general state of the project. So what should we be working on for the next upcoming sprint? All right. So to keep track of tasks during your sprint, we oftentimes will use a tool known as a Kanban board. All right. So a Kanban board is a graphical tool that everybody on the team can see that shows you what needs to be done, what's currently being worked on, and what has been completed during the sprint. All right. So the cool thing about this, we call it Kanban, is a pull rather than a push method of project management. So a push method means that you have some managers that are looking at the state of the project and they figure out tasks that need to be completed, and then they push those tasks down to the technical team and tell them to complete their work, right? And then follow up later on to see if the work is getting done. Kanban is, of course, the opposite of that. It's a pull method. So at the beginning of every sprint, you'll have a big list of stuff that needs to be done. We'll pull items into what's the column that's representing what's currently being worked on, and then as items are done and we clear work out, the team has the ability to just go out and pull those tasks that need to be done and pull them into their workflow and start doing them that way. So you have more ownership of what you're working on, and you get to decide what needs to be worked on when. All right, so the way that this will work, right, is a Kanban board. This is a super generic example. You can implement something like this using tiles and Trellos, where you can have little tiles for each task and set them up in columns, kind of like how I'll be demonstrating here. But your Kanban board doesn't have to look exactly like this. I'm just giving you a very generic example to show you the general idea of how this is going to work. So you see we've got 3 columns here. We have the sprint backlog, we have the in progress column, and we have the done column of things that we've completed. All right, so in the sprint backlog, we're going to put tasks that need to be done during the sprint here. All right, we want to break tasks, big tasks, up into subtasks. We want if an item in that column to take no more than about 4 hours worth of work. So if you just sat down all afternoon and worked on something, you should be able to get that task done. If it would take you longer than that, consider breaking that task up into subtasks, just so you can have a more steady feedback loop of showing how tasks are being completed and that you're working on things. All right, once we have our sprint backlog put into the Kanban board, if you're working on tasks, they go into the in progress column. Okay, so when you have your sprint meeting at the beginning of a sprint and you talk about what's going to be done and everybody gets their work assignments, everybody can go onto the Kanban board. They can grab tasks that they're currently working on and move them over to the in progress column. Okay, now a key thing about the in progress column is we have what's known as the work in progress limit, or the WIP limit. Okay, so only one task per person can be in the in progress column at a given time, right? The idea here is we don't want somebody having like 4 different tasks that they're responsible for completing all at the same time, and they're not able to effectively do all 4, multitask and do all of them at the same time. Okay, so the idea here is you can't keep pulling stuff from the sprint backlog into the in progress column until something is done. So you have to be continuously making progress on the project to get the work done to the point where you can then move more tasks out of the sprint backlog. Okay, this is really helpful for showing if you have a bottleneck in your project. If you have a task that's just sitting in the in progress column and it's not getting cleared, what you can do is you can say, hey, this isn't getting done. You can talk to that teammate and find out what help they need, and then we can do what's called a swarm, where you put extra resources on that one task, and you can help that person get the task done also. All right, and that's not meant to be a sort of like a judgmental thing. We understand that tasks will sometimes take way longer than we originally planned before we start to actually do them if there's an unforeseen complication with the task. It's just, if there is something like that, we want to know about that and then get the extra help that we need to get those tasks done and out of the way so that we can continue to make progress on our project. All right, once you have your task done, you move it into the done column so you can show that your whole team that task has been completed. So everybody's updated on what's going on and what's getting done on the project. We want everybody to be able to update the Kanban board, so you can invite people to your board in Trello where everybody can update it. And we want to make sure it's your responsibility to communicate with your team and show how everything is progressing, right? It's important to keep updating your teammates on what you're personally doing, so that they know when your work is going to be completed. If they have a dependency on your work, they can get that plan around you completing your work also, and know when they can start on their next task also. It's important that the whole team knows what the state of the project is. All right, so a few takeaways from this that we want you to pay attention to. So these complex projects really need to be broken down into more manageable parts. You've probably noticed by now that these projects in this class are not something you can just throw together in the week before the end of the semester and get something that's going to work well. You need to be making steady progress on this throughout the whole semester to really get to the point where you have a nice prototype or really nice design packet by the end of the semester. All right, so Scrum, really great for getting the individual components of your project done on time. It's focused on these short-term deliverables, so it's really good at breaking that project up and helping you to make steady progress throughout the project. Now, we still think it's important to look at the whole project, right? Because the thing is, Scrum is so focused on the short-term deliverables that it can be easy to get bogged down in the details if you don't have a good idea of what the whole project should look like. All right, and it's still valuable to do some waterfall planning at the very start of a project, just to give a general idea of what the major milestones of your project is going to be. With that in mind, here's an idea of what the rest of the semester in this class will look like. So we essentially have 5 more sprints after the end of sprint 1 to get your projects done, right? So sprint 2 we'll be spending a lot of time doing design analysis and component selection. Right, so design analysis, we're talking about doing math, putting all of those hard engineering skills that you learned in all your core classes to work on a real design project, where we'll be making mathematical models of your prototype to make sure that your prototype concept is going to work, and you'll be able to take that data and then select specific components that you want to purchase with your project budget to actually build your prototype. All right, in Sprint 3, you'll build the first version of your prototype. So we're going to push you to get to a physical prototype or a more detailed sort of digital design if you're doing the remote option, to where we can do some testing, right? So the idea is by the end of Sprint 1, we want you to have enough of your components in place to where you can do some sort of useful testing to learn more about the problem. Sprint 4, you'll be doing some testing and prototype refinement, so you actually try and use the prototype. You'll probably learn what works well and what doesn't work well, and there'll be some design changes that need to happen as a result of this testing. Then in Sprint 5, you'll have the opportunity just to refine that prototype up more, and the idea here is we want you to be basically done with your prototype by the end of Sprint 5. That is the goal, is to have a completely finished prototype or finished design packet by the end of Sprint 5, so that Sprint 6 is just a buffer in case you need that extra time. Something takes longer than you were planning on. You have a little bit left in the semester to finish that up before you have to turn in your final deliverables in the class. All right, few key dates. The 2nd of November will be the end of Sprint 3, so that's when we want you to have prototype version 1 done. All right, so this is going to be a detailed check-in on your overall project progress, where we're going to try and make sure that you're really on track to finish up by the end of the semester. And you want to have your prototype or your design in some sort of state where we can start to do some more in-depth testing, right? So it doesn't necessarily have to be a cohesive whole yet. It just has to be in a state where we can do some sort of useful testing and we can learn something about how it's going to work when it's done. All right. At the end of Sprint 5, that'll be December 1st. That's when we want you to be basically done, right? And then your final deliverables, final report will be on December 11th. And that's sort of the end of the term right there. There's only 3 classes between the end of Sprint 5 and the end of term. So just be aware that you really do want to be done by the end of Sprint 5, because there's really not a whole lot of time to be banking on during Sprint 6. All right, so to do your planning, what we suggest you do in your next class is to appoint your product owner. So remember, find your most organized teammate who can contribute to the design project and help kind of manage the project, and make them be in charge, right? So give them the authority to manage this project. Next up, we want you to set up your project management system for your team. We highly recommend Trello for managing your Kanban board and setting up all the tasks that need to be done and sharing that amongst your team so that you can see what's being completed. We also, if you don't have it already, we suggest that you consider something like Slack or GroupMe so that you have a dedicated means for group communication where everybody can talk to one another easily. All right. From there, you can use the initial research that you guys have done so far to come up with some broad milestones of things that are going to need to be done to complete this project, and start putting those in as tiles in Trello so that you have an idea of what are the major things that need to happen. All right, once you have those, you can start to break that into subtasks, and then you can estimate how long it's going to take for each of those subtasks or small tasks to be done, and start to arrange them in a sequence. Remember that tasks can occur in parallel, so you can be simultaneously working on some things, and that's okay because you have multiple teammates. You can assign out different tasks that way. All right, that is a brief introduction to Scrum and Agile as we'll be using it in this class. So if you have any questions, swing by class, and we'll be happy to give you guys feedback and get you started with project management in this class and answer any questions that you might have. See you in class.